Everyone, welcome back. Today we've got a relatively short special topic e-class for you on classism and nativism. This e-class is short in part because I want you to watch a really interesting video on wealth inequality in the US to help us really think about what it means to live in poverty and how difficult it actually can be to get out of poverty in the United States. And then I want you guys to explore a website that just has some really good facts and answers some common questions on immigration in the United States. But first, we're going to define and talk a little bit about classism and nativism. So first, let's start with classism. So this is the prejudiced thoughts and discriminatory actions based on differences in socioeconomic status, income, and perceived class. This usually occurs through those of more means or the upper class, devaluing or thinking less of those who are perceived to be of a lower class or those who have less wealth and income. And as we've seen with the other isms, classism occurs both through individual attitudes and behaviors in terms of both external and internal stigma associated with being of a lower class, which we'll talk about here in a minute. As well as the systems and policies that are set up to benefit one group or one class at the expense of another class. In the United States, we've seen a really drastic divide in terms of income and wealth, and that's actually the video that you guys are going to watch as the rest of this class, this special topic e-class, is on. And this video was actually created, I believe, in 2014, so several years ago. And the wealth divide in the United States has actually gotten worse since then. So it really provides a good view of the stark contrast in terms of wealth inequality in the United States. Now, it's also important to recognize that the rationale that supports these systems and the unequal valuing of individuals who are perceived to be of different classes is really woven into the fabric of our society. We think about all of the derogatory terms that people might say jokingly or not that really perpetuate these stereotypes that really continue to undermine people who have less wealth and less income and make it more difficult for them to achieve either, more wealth, more income, middle class status, and things like that. So things like individuals who are on welfare, there's a common stereotype against them or assumptions about their work ethic, their character, their morality, and things like that. And a lot of this comes back to that Protestant work ethic that we've had within the United States, the idea that anyone can pull themselves up by their bootstraps if they just work hard enough. However, that really ignores the cycles of poverty, the fact that low-income areas, people living in those areas really don't have the resources in order to break these cycles of poverty. In particular, some of you may be looking into education and unequal access to high quality education resources. We see that in particular in terms of lower income areas, parts of town having schools that have less resources. Those kids who go to those schools then have less opportunity for taking AP classes, for taking even prep courses for the SATs and things like that, which makes it harder for them to get into the good schools. Now, it's also particularly important to recognize that people who are poor or working class sometimes internalize the dominant society's beliefs and attitudes towards them and play them out against themselves and other classes. And this can also then fuel into issues of racism, nativism, xenophobia, and things like that. Internalized classism is the acceptance and justification of classism by working class and poor people. So examples of this include feelings of inferiority to higher class people, disdain or shame about traditional patterns of class in one's family, and a denial of heritage, feelings of superiority to people lower on the class spectrum than oneself, or in many cases, people who are of a different race or religion. And finally, hostility and blame towards other working class or poor people, and beliefs that classist institutions are fair, when in fact they really aren't. It's also important to recognize that if we do have more privilege in terms of classism, that we can be allies. We can have attitudes and behaviors that are anti-classist. We can be committed to increasing our understanding of the issues related to classism, particularly that internalization of classism, recognizing and valuing people even though they may be of a lower socioeconomic status than us, recognizing their worth and value as a human being, and recognizing that they have more to offer than often than society gives them value for, simply because they haven't had the same opportunities that we have, simply because they've grown up in a family that has less resources. So now let's switch topics a little bit and talk about nativism. This is generally defined as the favoring of native-born citizens over immigrants. You may also hear this referred to as xenophobia, which is the dislike of or prejudice against people from other countries. Nativism can be played out on a number of levels. There's political nativism, under which political activity or views are thought to be a threat to the nation. There's religious nativism, and this is directed against members of a particular religious denomination. And racial nativism, where members of a particular ethnic group were targeted based on physical features or cultural traits. So you may see this intertwining again with our discussions of racism as well as classism. And throughout the history of the United States, we've seen nativism play out in different ways. From early on, we've seen prejudice against people from different cultures or different religions. So, for example, there was a time in the United States when people were very much against Irish immigrants. Today, we see it in terms of immigrants coming up from our southern borders, whether they be from Mexico or other South American countries. We've also seen it political nativism in terms of pros or cons to socialism, for example. We're seeing that play out right now. We've also seen it in terms of racial nativism. Again, largely we see that in terms of racism. And so for the last part of this class, I want you to explore the website from the American Immigration Council. This is Giving Facts a Fighting Chance, Addressing Common Questions on Immigration. And it is from 2015, so it has some older information in terms of policies and things like that, but I think it's particularly interesting, particularly in this, our current kind of social standing and fabric on what the Obama administration did in terms of immigration and how that's playing out now. We also have important information on this website about questions like correlations between immigration and crime, whether or not immigrants get access to public benefits and things like that. So for the last part of this class, you're just going to explore that website.